So whenever I do these speeches, I always try to kind of gauge the room and get an idea of who's heard about Airbnb, who hasn't, what folks think about our company and whatnot. Can I get a show of hands of any Airbnb hosts in the room? Decent. Anybody that other folks who have used it but aren't necessarily hosts? Excellent. Anybody that hates it? One guy, there's always one guy in the back. So anyway, it's always one guy. So let me just start by saying, I think the scene that was set earlier in many ways, for me, kind of crystallized the presentation I'm going to give now, because I was kind of struggling over the last several days with what exactly I was going to say. When I normally give these presentations, it's about specific data of a country where I'm trying to get a deal with the government, and I show slideshows, and they like them, and this and that. But with this opportunity, I kind of want to take a step back and talk about a little bit about how Airbnb views the world. And I think many of the global forces that shaped the emergence of the sharing economy and Airbnb are actually forces that are impacting Puerto Rico right now. So even though I think that there's opportunity, or there's always challenges in dire situations, there's also significant opportunities. And if you look at Airbnb, a company that was started by three guys in their 20s in San Francisco trying to pay the rent, 8 years ago, we've grown into about a $31 billion company, and we are global. And we are, along with Uber, who's having a tougher time of it these days than we are, but disruptors. And we're disrupting economies, we're disrupting traditional sectors, and we're disrupting governments. I am hopeful, and I hope you all will hear more about this in the coming days, of the agreement that we're going to be striking here, hopefully, with the government of Puerto Rico. But as I was getting ready to come up here, I was talking to Tom, and he was mentioning the fact that whenever there's a crisis, there's always an opportunity to kind of push the envelope and make change. So I'm going to try to quickly go through these 50 slides as fast as I can, or I'm going to get like the death stare. But again, if anybody has any questions or whatnot, hold them to the end, but I will try to get through these as quickly as possible. But I think the one key thing about Airbnb is that we're a company that represents change. And we represent change because we see the world, obviously, in a constant state of change. Our people, our technologies, our climate, our economies, and the way we travel are constantly changing. And specifically, when you look at it, people are changing. Over the past decade, we've seen massive accelerations in technology, greater interconnectedness, urban growth, and a new generation of tech-savvy consumers, the millennials, who are coming of age and are seriously disrupting the way things have been done in the past. If you look at some of the graphs of how large this generation is and what's coming up behind it, it's phenomenal. And they are, again, impacting basically every single aspect of society. And like I said, after millennials, the next generation, Generation Z, or the Centennials, as I've heard them being called, are going to be taking over, and they're going to have much, I think, greater challenges to deal with and address, and all the problems that the Gen Xers and the millennials will leave for them. If you look at kind of the demographics, the key demographic of consumers, 18 to 49-year-olds, by 2025, they'll compose 76%. I mean, it's a phenomenal impact that this generation is going to have, and Airbnb and new economies are largely built on the foundation of this new generation. And the one thing that we've noticed here at Airbnb is that, and part of the reason why I think we've been such a successful company, is because this new generation values experience over ownership. And our tagline, live like a local. And folks really want that experience. And that is what's disrupting hotels, for us, in our case, what's disrupting governments. But it really is changing our economies, our labor force, consumer habits. And these folks, really, this generation wants to do things differently. And related to this, millennials are also impacting the way we live. We're seeing massive urbanization throughout the world. We have now mega cities in Mexico, Brazil, India, China, other parts of Asia. And some of the challenges that we're going to face, and something that we as a company, even though we're a tech company and we're in the hospitality and the accommodation sector, things that we look at long term, we look at how governments are going to ensure food supply, how we're going to protect our environment, finding newer and cheaper sources of energy, building modern transportation systems and infrastructure. These are all things that are going to have a significant impact on the way our societies develop over the next generation. So in addition to the changes, in the way our people are behaving and acting and the growth in this new generation, our technology is also changing. If you look at this chart, it just speaks to the growing interconnectedness of our societies. Sorry. So, we are going to have 40% of the world's population on the internet by 2025. People with mobile phones will represent 75% of the world's population. And almost all people will have 5G wireless internet over their phones. And that is a tremendous impact that folks are going to be having. And as a result, what cars were for the baby boomers, phones are to millennials. And with that comes the massive impact, or the massive amount of computer power that's being seen. Throughout Latin America, it's something that we look at as a company as well, because we have pretty strong growth in the region. We are constantly looking at what the penetration rate is for mobile platforms. In Latin America, obviously it's growing. 640 million people as of 2021 will have access to the internet through their smartphones. In addition to our technologies, our climate is changing. We are, as a company, one of the things that we're doing is working to assist disaster relief. So we do outreach with governments a lot in the Caribbean region because of the growing severity of storms and hurricanes. And one of the things that we do as a company, and it's a small thing, but what we do is we try to open up our homes, our accommodations to folks that are suffering from natural disasters. Additionally, one of the things that we look at as a company is, like I said earlier, the impact that climate change is having. And one of the things that we look at, believe it or not, is how more and more violent storms are creating parts of the world that are very kind of challenging for folks to live in. In addition to our climate, in addition to our technology, in addition to our people, obviously travel is changing. And the one thing that we look at as a company is how we can react to what consumers want. And I think as a company, we do a pretty good job. One of my standard lines with governments and other stakeholders is that Airbnb is consumer driven at the end of the day. If it wasn't us, it would be some other company. What travelers want is more kind of community-led tourism. Like I said, they want to live like a local. They want to be able to experience new cultures in different ways. And if you look at the amount of air passengers that are now flying, about 3.7 billion people, and it's a tremendous, tremendous figure. And as a company, that's obviously something that we constantly look at in terms of how we can tap into that and how we can meet the demands of our consumers. Related to that, international tourist arrivals, which is about 1.2 billion. Now, one of the things that I constantly get grief from are the hotels. Hotels are constantly complaining that Airbnb is taking their market share, that we're disrupting the industry, and obviously they don't like it. However, over the last couple of years, hotel profits have been astronomical. Industry-wide, their profits reached $73 billion in 2015, surpassing the previous peak from 2007. So Airbnb is obviously having some small impact on the hotel industry, but in many ways, as a disrupting company that believes wholeheartedly in the free economy, we believe competition is a good thing. And what we're seeing now is that hotels are starting to adapt to us, and they're starting to, major chains are buying boutique hotels. They're offering local tour services, unique experiences for their guests. And at the end of the day, it's better for consumers and everyone else. So we are fully on board with continuing to try to disrupt this industry as much as we can. Yeah. So almost 10% of the global economy is based on travel and tourism. $7.2 trillion, which represents about 9.8%. It's greater than the revenues from oil. And 1 in 11 jobs globally is impacted or directly related to the tourism sector. In this region, in the Caribbean, more than 2 million jobs are directly tied to tourism. And I think that's a massively untapped potential for Puerto Rico. And it's something, obviously, that Airbnb wants to work with the government and all the stakeholders on to promote. The one question that we constantly kind of ask ourselves and is asked of us is, how do we ensure that the tourism boom is going to spread to the have-nots? One of the great things I think about Airbnb is that we are democratizing travel. We're making it more accessible for folks. And we're also, in our mind, creating millions of micro-entrepreneurs, our hosts, people that are unlocking value in assets that they already own, and are contributing to local economic activity. So how did we get here? From our perspective, and I think, as I said at the outset, part of what really excited me about the introduction here was that the 5 global trends that I feel Airbnb and the sharing economy faced 10 years ago are still going on here in Puerto Rico. And I think in that challenge, there's a lot of opportunity. For me, the catalyst was the global economic crisis that hit, obviously, the world, but really acutely in the United States, which forced people to reconsider how they wanted to live their lives, how they were going to make money, as well as the explosion of smartphones. And it was a perfect kind of storm that hit at the same time. And the founders of my company took advantage of that, and they saw an opportunity and they had an idea. But in addition to the economy and technology, the other 3 major trends that gave rise to the sharing economy included, as I was talking about, the growth of the millennial generation, our changing climate, and the explosion in travel and specifically community-led tourism. Like I said earlier, our view, Airbnb's view, is that we want to provide people with an opportunity to take advantage of assets they already own. So, beyond home sharing, there's also cars, Uber, Lyft. There are companies that are sharing economy companies that are focused on sharing tools, food, electrical grids now, even hospital networks. So these are all things that we see as very beneficial. In addition to that, last week the government of South Korea announced that they were going to start capturing in their GDP numbers the economic activity created by the sharing economy, and that's something that we would love to see Puerto Rico do. So I think the rest of my slides got cut off. So this is talking about just Airbnb in general, and if you look at the growth that we've had, it's been astronomical. It took us about 6 years to get to 1 million listings, and then we doubled that. And now we're just over 3 million listings of properties worldwide. We've had more than 200 million people use our platform. By, I believe it's 2025, we believe we're going to have about 1 billion people on the Airbnb platform, either as a host or a guest. We're in 65,000 cities, 192 countries. There are literally, I think, 3 countries where you cannot find an Airbnb for obvious reasons: North Korea, Syria, and Iran. Everywhere else, you can find us. So in the Caribbean, which is obviously, part of what I do day in and day out is meet with governments. And one of the things that we want to offer governments is data, aggregate data. So they have an idea of our presence. Because we are growing rapidly, and for a lot of countries and governments in the region, it's important to have a snapshot of how many people are using Airbnb so that they can negotiate airlift prices with airlines, so they just have a better idea of kind of what is going on in their jurisdiction. In the Caribbean, we have about 48,000. It's about 50,000 now. It grows almost daily throughout the region. The Caribbean and Central America is obviously not the largest for us. Our largest markets remain Europe and the United States. In Latin America, our largest is obviously Brazil, just because of the size of the country. And in this part of the world, the fastest growing country for us, ironically, has been Cuba, where we now have more than 18,000 listings, which when I talk to my friends in Washington, D.C., and I talk about, how if you really want to promote change and dynamism on the island, one of the best ways to do it is through the work we're doing with casas particulares and entrepreneurs on the island. And our growth rate, 93% from 2015 to 2016, and this will continue to grow. It's just astronomical growth. So we brought into this region, into the Central American and Caribbean region, about 600,000 people over the past 12 months, 2016, and 90,000 people from the region used Airbnb, either locally or United States, Europe, wherever. In Puerto Rico, and these are kind of the key numbers, and these are the numbers that we would share on an aggregate rolling basis with the government, so they have a snapshot. We have about 3,500 hosts here on the island. We brought in 192,000 tourists over the past 12 months. Your average Airbnb host made about $5,800 US. And the typical number of nights hosted by a host was about 38 days out of the year. So for me, what this tells me is that there's massive potential to grow. And I think one of the things that Puerto Rico, as well as U.S. Virgin Islands, where we signed a tax agreement with them a couple weeks ago, the great thing that Puerto Rico has going for it is that you have, on the mainland in the United States, 36% of Americans have passports. That's it. So you have this whole other, group of folks that do not have passports. And if they're not going to go to Florida, they might as well come to Puerto Rico. And part of what we want to do is work with the government, the Puerto Rico Tourism Company, to promote Puerto Rico as a tourist destination. This is just a geographic representation of where our listings are throughout the island. This kind of fluctuates, and many of these folks are listed on Airbnb and also some of the other competing platforms. So our social value proposition, as I said at the start, I think the great thing about Airbnb is that we're democratizing travel and we're making it affordable and accessible for people that have not maybe done it before or cannot drop $400 a night, in a hotel or in an all-inclusive resort somewhere. The other thing that I tell many of the governments that I deal with is that one of the great things about Airbnb is that we have a core group, our community we call them, of folks who are fervent Airbnb supporters. And for example, my conversations with my friends in the government in Panama who don't particularly like Airbnb right now, I tell them, look, you can try to shut us down. You're not going to be able to because you're fighting the future. But if you do it in some way, then many of the folks that use Airbnb in Panama are just going to go to Costa Rica, or they're going to go to San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua. And the one way to really kind of get a Panamanian going is tell them that they're going to lose business to Costa Rica. And that's been helpful. In addition to that, our guests, on average, stay 2.1 times longer than your average hotel guest. And as I was saying, millennials love to travel. And this is the main reason why Airbnb is doing so well these days, because millennials make up the bulk of our constituency. But we've also noticed in the last several years, interesting enough, that the fastest growing segment of users, my time is almost up, the fastest growing number of users are older folks, folks whose kids have gone off to college, or they're looking for a little extra money to make the rent or pay for food. And next slide. And again, like I was saying, we're also much more affordable than hotels, although for us, that is not really the value proposition. We think we offer something different, not just something cheaper. And I'll just go through these quickly. Democratizing revenue, like I said, up to 50% of Airbnb guests spend their money in local communities. And this is having a knock-on effect in all of the countries where we're watching this closely. And it is having a big impact with local business owners, local restaurants, local bars. We estimate that about 1.3 million jobs are created due to Airbnb economic activity globally. And again, our impact on restaurants, if you look at the global, kind of the larger tourism ecosystem, which is more than just hotels, the impact that we have with restaurants, bars, taxis, you name it, is pretty substantial. So quickly, how do we make it work for everyone? And this is part of what my job is. We educate government officials, we provide data, we meet with opinion leaders, we speak with the media. We work to share data. We help evolve policy. One of the things we want to do with Puerto Rico is help develop modern, progressive legislation and regulations that will promote the sharing economy, innovation, and tech startups, because we think that is the future here. And we also want to pay our fair share in taxes. And we are working now to see if we can strike a deal where we will be collecting taxes on behalf of our hosts and remitting it to the government. I talked quickly about our core constituency. If you look at it, Airbnb as a brand has one of the highest consumer loyalty numbers of any other major company. And for us, that is something that's important, and it's something that we continue to strive to cultivate. Finally, paraphrase Victor Hugo, no army of special interests can resist an idea whose time has come. And for us, that's home sharing. It's the sharing economy. And it's a way to do new things because the world is changing rapidly. So again, millennial world, connected planet, sustainable cities, and changing economies are kind of the things that are coming together now that are making companies like Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, and others so successful. One of the things, as a company that we constantly do is innovate. We believe that if we're not innovating every day, we're on the path to becoming irrelevant. One of the things that we launched last November was something called Trips, which is basically highly kind of curated local tour guides, and it's something we're excited about. It's something that I'm hoping we can unroll here in Puerto Rico sometime in the next year. We have a couple of key markets. The only place we're doing it in the Caribbean right now is in Cuba, but I think sooner or later we'll do it here in Puerto Rico.